In an unpredictable world, you can't simply wait for change to happen. We created McKinsey Live for leaders like you. Our global experts break down the need to know on the issues that matter most to decision makers and to society. We'll introduce you to leading research, new and transformational ideas, and practical knowledge and strategies, all to empower the changemakers of today, enabling you to step forward boldly, tackle real challenges, and drive change with clarity and purpose. We're helping you take control so you can drive the conversation, so you can lead fearlessly while leaving no one behind, so you can take the reins to create and accelerate growth, so you can build resilience for the future. Together, we can push towards the opportunities of our era. Let's get started now.
Hello and welcome to McKinsey Live. I'm Lucia Rahilly, McKinsey's editorial director and your host for today's event, From Strategy to Performance, How Leaders Can Build an Operating Model That Works. Before we start, quick heads up that our goal with this series of live events is to give you a chance to engage with our experts on our latest research. Obviously, asking questions is a big part of that. So if you are registered for this event, please feel free to use the Q&A functionality within your live stream to ask whatever is on your mind. So at McKinsey, we have obviously long been known for our work on strategy, and certainly if you ask most CEOs what it takes to win, even in today's incredibly fast-changing, serially disrupted landscape, they will invoke strategy as vital. And yes, of course, they are correct. Strategy is the sine qua non of performance, but there's also a catch. Even the smartest and the most purposefully thought out strategy isn't enough to yield meaningful competitive advantage on its own. And that's where today's conversation comes in. We're going to explore some new research on one of the biggest and most under-leveraged drivers of business performance, and that's the operating model. Joining us this morning are McKinsey senior partners Alexis Krivkovich and Brooke Weddle. Alexis is the global co-head of our People and Organizational Performance practice at McKinsey. She brings deep expertise in organizational effectiveness, culture, and transformative change in sectors including banking, tech, media, telecoms. And she's also passionate about leadership development. She's the author of McKinsey's annual Women in the Workplace report, which folks can find on our website, mckinsey.com. It's a signature report for us. Alexis is based in San Francisco. And Brooke is also a leader in our People and Organizational Performance practice and directs our Organized offering, which focuses specifically on today's topic, operating model transformations. She has also led our culture and change management initiatives across North America and in advanced industries. And you can also hear more from Brooke on our McKinsey Talks Talent podcast, which is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. Brooke is based in Washington, D.C. Brooke and Alexis, welcome to McKinsey Live. Thanks for making the time to be together with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
So let's get rolling and let's start with some context. Both of you speak with executives every day about the various forces that are now converging to reshape how organizations operate. Alexis, talk to us about the shifts that are putting the most pressure on operating models today and how these dynamics might be changing the default for leaders, changing what good looks like, in other words.
Yeah, this is a great place to start because I think each of these shifts here is both a tailwind and a headwind at the same time to companies. And as we spend time with CEOs and executives, they really do think of it as very much a mix of forces coming at them. If you think about the AI automation piece, very, very much a tailwind in terms of the potential and opportunity. But most organizations today are still really struggling to get out of what we call affectionately pilot purgatory. So they know that the opportunity is there, but figuring out an operating model that allows them to capture that opportunity at scale is where the real focus is shifting right now. Then you take other areas like geopolitics. There's so much uncertainty and changing landscape, and really almost by the day, the ways that that's evolving is requiring organizations to be incredibly nimble in this moment. So things that they would have otherwise spent years planning for, whether it's supply chain shifts or workforce shifts, they're having to be ready to pivot and think through in months and weeks. So it's another, again, area where there's strategy behind that, but the core of what allows execution to happen quickly in moments like this is being able to have the kind of operating model that has the sensors and responsiveness. You add to that, for the first time probably ever, we have 4 generations in the workforce simultaneously, 4 generations that operate very differently in terms of how they use technology, how they engage, what their expectations and their hierarchy is of what they care about. And you have real pinch points for a lot of companies and what that means about skill transitions that need to be underway as generations age out and transition and others come in for the first time. And then always this is in the backdrop of a hotly competitive environment. I think every leader feels today is more competitive than the day before, if for no other reason than with the access to capital. There's so many new companies starting up that are putting pressure on the system, the good kind of pressure, but again, requires the sort of nimbleness that companies really strive for.
Okay, that's a super helpful overview of the landscape. Now let's start getting a bit into the research. We mentioned at the top that even the best laid strategy can go awry if it lacks the right operating model to enable performance. Alexis, very practically, would you give us a sense of what that means, why it matters, given the complexity and the backdrop that you just described?
What it means at the heart is that the best laid plan without the right execution underneath it won't get you all the way there. And our research has shown this in quantitative form. In fact, companies fall short about 30% of the goal line of where they're aiming to get to, even when they feel like they have the absolute right strategy laid out on paper. And what's the reason why? Because what you need to do to mobilize that strategy, take it off the shelf or out of the boardroom and into practical application, means you need leaders aligned behind it. You need your processes to run to give you efficient decisions around it. You might need to change the way people operate, how capital moves. You need talent and skills to settle in and be adapted to meet the moment. And those are the areas when we look back with companies, they say, it wasn't that I didn't know what needed to get done. It was that the how was a lot harder than I thought.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Alexis. Okay, Brooke, let's turn to you and get into a bit more the how that Alexis just invoked. You've done quite a bit of work on what it looks like to redesign an operating model successfully. What have you learned from this hands-on experience, and what's new or what's different in the current context?
Yeah, thanks, Lucia. I mean, the how is hard, and I think our research is pretty consistent on that. We went back, though, to the original research we did on operating model transformation, which exactly 10 years ago. And we called that research the 9 golden rules of operating model design. And we'll come back to that a little later in the conversation. But one of the things that we found in that research when we tried to surface, this challenge and the insights around it was that operating model transformation is happening all the time these days. So 2/3 of the companies surveyed said that they had undertaken an operating model transformation in the past 2 years. And over 50% said that they were going to undertake an operating model transformation soon. So 2/3 in the past 2 years, 50% said this is happening imminently. And so I think that points very clearly to this is something that is top of mind for the executives that we're partnering up with. The second thing, and this gets to the hard point, is that it's not exactly always going well. So we found that 80% of organizations had completed their operating model redesign. And you might think, well, gosh, like 80%, that's a big number. But if you think about the effort and the resources required to transform your operating model, having 20% of organizations saying we actually didn't even complete our objectives, it actually creates, I would say, a burning platform to do this better. 63%, basically around 2/3, said that they were somewhat successful in completing their operating model transformation, again, leaving value on the table. And only 23%, so just less than a quarter, said that they would say that they had been highly successful. So if you take those two data points, organization, operating model transformations happening more continuously, and they're hard and we're not that good at them, we think this points very clearly to the need to build these capabilities in terms of organizational effectiveness and operating model design.
Okay, that's super helpful. And Alexis, what Brooke just said about this sort of constancy now of op model redesign and transformation resonates with the latest research in which we assert the importance of building redesign readiness into an organization's DNA. I believe you've framed that as the need to create a fingerprint, a unique operating model fingerprint that fits an organization's strategy and its explicit context. Presumably, there are certain characteristics or certain outcomes that we expect the best operating models to deliver. If that's right, what are those and why do they matter for performance?
Well, it's really, as Brooke was describing, the reason this is so hard is you're solving a simultaneous equation, right?
Yeah.
Getting the design is one piece of it, but you need to get all of these things happening simultaneously. So the clarity around resources, we know that companies that reallocate and rethink resource allocation outperform, and yet the vast majority of companies move that number around 1, 2, 3% year by year. So creating an environment where you really rethink fundamentally, where do I need capacity to go in the future, particularly in this moment where technology is enabling such big shifts when it comes to that and requiring big investment in areas. So really getting clear on what that looks like. A lot of the focus there that I see from executives is, can I flatten out, streamline, tighten up my organization so that I can free up capacity to reinvest it now in the new, because I see so much new opportunity around me. Going with that, you've got to have the right skills. So you need an employee base that is equipped and ready to move with the moment. Again, technology is sort of forcing this in an extreme. Most organizations are way behind what even their own employees say they would like to see in terms of more investment in their own capabilities to meet the moment in front of us. This isn't one of those things where we're going to toss, AI tooling across the fence and everyone's going to grab it and instantaneously figure out how to transform their lives. It's going to require real thinking about what are the skills we need for the future. How do we kind of map ourselves to that and build in that direction? The speed piece is huge. We talked about how these forces, they're not going away. If anything, everything feels to executives like it's an acceleration moment. I was talking with a CEO yesterday who said, I feel like I have to go from telling everyone it's a marathon to we're in permanent sprint, and I'm going to need a different enablement to make that possible, because just telling people to move faster isn't going to cut it. So how do I think about the end-to-end process differently? How do I take out and stop? We're really good at starting things. We're not great at stopping just about anything in an organization. How do I actually take out the noise so I can focus? And then finally, get the commitment underneath that. Because at the end of the day, we're moving people. You've got hearts and minds you've got to move. This is probably often the most neglected space, is sort of the belief that the existing culture will naturally modify itself and move us along and carry us where we need to go. When in fact, with a new operating model and a new way of being, you have to think quite specifically about what are the behaviors that I want to see, and are any of those different than what we rewarded in the past? How am I going to signal that out to a broad employee base? And then how am I going to incentivize it?
Super helpful. And Brooke, what else should leaders be reckoning with beyond these four factors, these four sets of outcomes? What else should be top of mind as leaders are looking to deliver on their strategy?
Yeah, thanks, Lucia. It's a great question. And, if those are the four outcomes that an operating model seeks to achieve, I think the question then becomes, well, what are the collection of elements that I should focus on to achieve those outcomes? And I still work with a lot of leaders that start with structure, boxes and lines, names, and there's this work is important, and the org chart has been around for a really long time, and in some ways has served us well. At the same time, we live in a very different world, as Alexis outlined at the start of this session, and so we, over the past year, have re-examined what are the different elements that really should be considered part of operating model design as you think about unlocking value and getting to close that gap on the strategy. And we worked with Nobel laureates, we worked with our clients, we leveraged expertise, leading academic thinkers, we applied theory like transaction cost economics, but then we also layered in really practical insights from what's worked and what hasn't worked when it comes to operating model design. And in the end, we developed this view here, which is of 12 elements. And some of you might recall McKinsey's 7S framework from the 1970s. Well, this is the updated version of those 7S's. And yes, we have gone from 7 to 12. And we would argue that in the world that we're living in, there are these 12 elements that need to be considered. And you can group them in terms of thinking about the structural components of your model, some of the workflows and processes, then talent questions, skills, capabilities, how do you want leaders to lead? And finally, the culture, right? The software, the glue that really holds the operating model together. And when it comes down to it, we know that each organization is going to need to consider a set of design choices against each of these elements. And what we're really excited about in this research is that we can start to use data and present a fact-based view of what your unique fingerprint could be or should be given your strategic context. The other thing that we have been accumulating data on is if you are a product platform model or a matrix, right? You have a vision of the kind of organization you want to be. We know that certain design choices are going to help you achieve that vision more so than others. So we're trying to create a common language. That is the 12 elements here. And we are bringing data to the set of design choices that each of these elements imply.
And Brooke, as you've just invoked, today we're talking about new research on organizing the value, but this is obviously not a new topic for our firm. You just alluded to 7S, and you alluded earlier to the 9 golden rules. Talk to us about this previous work on the 9 golden rules and why they matter and how they fit in here.
Yeah, sure. Back in 2015, which sounds like a really long time ago, I guess because it was, we did a body of work on what are the golden rules of operating model transformation. And so when we developed a perspective on the 12 elements, we said, well, let's go back also and check in on the how, right? How can organizations actually deliver on their operating model transformation? We surveyed over 2,000 organizations globally, cross sectors, and we interrogated over 20 specific levers, right, that organizations typically pull in terms of implementing their operating model. And what you see on the page here is that about half of those golden rules were consistent. I note the one on boxes and lines that we were just talking about and the need to go beyond structure. So that's still relevant. We still see the power in that golden rule. But you see others here that are new, right? And a lot of those, I would argue, have to do with building more capability amongst different leaders to deliver on operating model transformation and to think differently about how value is created in the organization. And the other thing I'll note on this research is that these new golden rules actually increase your odds of success to 97%, which is a very high number. And that is actually more power, a higher degree of likelihood of success than the previous golden rule. So we feel that this is a good set to anchor on as you contemplate the operating model transformation that you might have top of mind for your organization.
Yeah, 97% is pretty high. Alexis, I would welcome your thoughts here too. You've been involved in this research for a while.
Well, what strikes me is the emphasis right now on the leadership component. And this is a lot of what I'm hearing from executives right now is it feels like a different moment in how they need to show up, lead from the front, and then rethink the ask of their leaders 1-2 layers into the organization. Most big companies today, like where the rubber hits the road, is really kind of 2-3 levels in. I think this is a group of managers and leaders that often gets the short end of the stick, right? The frozen middle, the stuck leadership group. But in fact, they're the huge unlock to all of this. And you can see that emphasis right now is really only rising. And so a lot of where I see the dialogue happening from the board into the executive team and more broadly is how do we need to change ourselves? How do we need to equip ourselves to lead differently through this type of a moment? And in an environment that's going to be much more dynamic, I think almost as a perpetual state, certainly if you think about just, if nothing else, the technology moment we're in, much more dynamic. How do we create that muscle broadly inside our organization?
Okay, super helpful. I am mindful of time. We actually have quite a big audience here today and a lot of engagement. I would love to fit in a few questions. And we have a number of questions here on the how, which we invoked earlier. So let's start at the beginning. Who should be involved in initial discussions about redesigning an operating model? Brooke, maybe you could take that one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would think about this in two different ways. One, I do think there is value in that top-down, let's call it commander's intent view of the operating model design. And so I think, CEOs with whom I partner certainly like to bring in the expertise of their functional leaders. Clearly today, the role of the CHRO in terms of the changing landscape of skills and talent is critical, but then also side by side with the CTO or the CIO, right, to understand how AI could truly transform different parts of the business. Of course, this is not just a functional, kind of approach either. The need to bring in business leaders, right, who again bring that view of where are we going to not just enable value, but create new value is critical. The new part of this, though, is what can you actually understand from bottom up in the organization? So I was talking to a CEO the other day, and she said, well, I actually think most of my best ideas when it comes to operating model transformation are coming from deeper in the organization, because they're the ones that are actually, speaking of sensing, understanding how AI is really going to totally transform a workflow, right? Or completely change the way that we approach, a process, or, maybe it's interfacing with a customer or a client differently. So I think that is the new part, the top-down view. And yes, you need to have a diversity of perspectives, but then how do you bring in some of those ideas from deeper in the organization that could actually be just, if not more, transformative?
Super helpful. Okay, we have had so many questions on AI, agentic AI, which is not surprising. I'm going to give it to someone who's brought in a stat. AI adoption has a reported success rate as low as 5%. Someone's brought their data. In your view, how will AI reshape operating models, and what needs to change in strategy execution for companies to capture real value from it? And if there's anything specific to agentic AI there, feel free to bring it up. Alexis, you're an AI expert. Let's hear from you on this one.
Well, the change management on this is critical. And I think this is the piece most companies have come to the realization on. I was just last week with a CEO who said, I don't worry that we can't find the right use cases. I worry that we can't figure out how to move the organization quickly enough to wrap themselves around those. And we sort of affectionately refer to the walk the dog phenomenon. The walk the dog phenomenon is the idea that the biggest recipient of the benefits of AI to date has been the family dog, because you get an extra 30 minutes in your day. You can do a spin around the block. That's goodness, for everyone, certainly for the family pet. It doesn't transform companies the way that we're investing in AI. We see the potential for AI. What transformed companies is to rethink fundamentally how the entire workflow looks different. And this is the challenge in this moment, because over 90% of jobs will be significantly impacted, all the way up and including the CEO. 30, 50, 70% of what you do could be augmented by AI, particularly when you add agentic, depending on the job you're sitting in. But it's not 100%, which means you have to rethink and almost imagine a workplace where everybody has a new job 3 years from now, completely redefined. So how do you put yourself on a glide path to that? There's a piece of that that's about fluency. Do we even understand what we're working with? The performance management. What does it look like to manage a team that has agents inside it? What does the day-to-day flow of that look like? How do you take a process end to end and rethink it to put the technology inside? A lot of where we see the failure right now is these point solutions where I fix one thing, I automate one piece, but I miss that that's one piece inside a whole big, long process. And what I need to reimagine is that whole process in its entirety in a different way. And then there's the culture and trust, right? A lot of early AI has been sloppy seconds, not good experiments, that people lose trust in the potential. So how do you create a journey where you get people excited about it, but they also believe that this can create consistent, good, verified outcomes? All of those pieces have to come together. All those pieces were the operating model components that Brooke was talking about before. And that's why you really have to think about that question as a holistic question of how am I going to shift the entirety of the model in which we're working day to day to meet this moment of AI.
Yeah, I find this to be a super interesting stretch of time, frightening as it may be. Very quickly, could you give us a quick example of some of the steps or something that leaders have done in your experience to successfully rebuild their operating model? An example, in other words. Brooke, let's go to you for that.
Yeah, I'll give you two quick examples. One, I don't think you can shortchange, and you saw this in the new golden rules too, this senior leader alignment. One organization I worked with, after the top team came together around a clear vision for what they wanted the future state operating model transformation to be, actually created a little bit of a narrative, a memo that they collectively signed, right, as a commitment around where they were all headed. And also it provided a lot of clarity in terms of the language that they ultimately used with the rest of the organization. So that's and this alignment factor, I think, is huge. The other quick hit I'd give you is the behaviors and mindsets. Again, we saw this in the golden rules, the new version as well. And really understanding what those behavioral shifts are and then the underlying mindsets is really critical. And again, an organization, a big global organization working on this operating model transformation, I had the privilege of working with them closely, really did this top to bottom and actually worked with, including the top team, but then that got cascaded and amplified throughout the organization about practicing these behaviors and living into them through role play, through running water through the pipes. At the end of the day, it is a series of sprints, and it's, operating model implementation needs to be a full contact sport, if you ask me, right? In terms of really sussing out where the challenges are going to be and therefore how we need to show up differently.
Okay, that brings us to time. This has been a super interesting and useful discussion. Alexis and Brooke, thanks again for joining us to discuss such a timely and widely relevant topic.
Great to be here. Thank you.
And as always, many thanks to all of you in our McKinsey Live audience for being together with us today. Please visit our website, mckinsey.com, for a replay of this event and all our previous McKinsey Lives, as well as for more on this specific operating model research. And a heads up that for our October event, we are going to go deep on the disruption of the day, and that is You Got It, Agentic AI, and how to take advantage of the incredible opportunity it offers. That will be with two of our leaders on AI and agentic in particular, Clemens Hajartar and Dave Kerr. See you there. Have a great day or evening and be well.